Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for our session on practical steps to becoming a neuro-inclusive employer and the Welcome to Work pledge. It is lovely to see you here. I'm Jayne. I'm the membership manager here at Social Enterprise Scotland. If you're not familiar with us, we are the intermediary and membership body for social enterprises across Scotland. And very simply, our role is to champion all things social enterprise and to promote, support, connect, and represent the sector. As part of this, we run a wide variety of events and sessions covering, yes, a very diverse subject range, I would say. It can be topical, it can be practical, they can be thematic, and I think this one probably is a bit of all of that. Our sessions are usually pretty informal. We follow the usual online rules. If while the presentations are happening, please keep yourself on mute, and we'll use the tried and tested raise a hand virtual, please, if you'd like to come in. If that's not possible, just come in and we'll manage it. Don't worry. Please use the chat to say hello, to introduce yourself, your organisation. You can also obviously use it for questions, or if you've got any experiences you'd like to share, good or bad practice. We're always keen to hear what's happening out there in the real world. We will share the presentation and speaker details following the session. And just a plea from me that we have a very, very, very short survey for people to complete at the end, if you wouldn't mind taking 2 minutes to do that. I think the other thing for me to say is we want this to be a safe and friendly space today. It will be confidential in terms of, I suppose with it being recorded, I suppose you just need to be careful what you're saying. So it's just to be aware of that. But also to say, we're all here to learn. So we would thank you in advance for being kind and considerate with any experiences that people share. Hey. So I think, a diverse and inclusive workforce and world and values that sit behind that are kind of at the heart of social enterprise. So any initiatives that help us along that journey, I think are important. So I'm very much looking forward to learning more about being a neuro-inclusive employer and employee, I think. So I'm delighted to hand over to Andy and Tasha from Welcome Brain, and they are going to steer us through the session today. Andy, Tasha, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jayne. And thank you everyone for coming along today. I was so pleased when I saw the numbers. It's so heartening to see that there's a lot of people interested in this topic. Obviously, you don't intend to start at all like this talking about global politics, but there's been sort of some attacks on DEI in certain parts of the world recently. So this is especially important. It's very rare you talk about things like this as being globally important, but I think that they genuinely are. And we're very lucky in Scotland that we sort of are a progressive beacon when it comes to things like neuro-inclusion and inclusion in general. So as Jayne said, Tasha and I are from Welcome Brain Consulting. We're based in Edinburgh. We're a social enterprise supporter member, and we are a neuro-inclusion consultancy. So we work with organizations to help them become neuro-inclusive. What that means in practice is about 1 million different things, and it varies by organization to organization. But usually what that means is helping create environments where neurodivergent people can thrive and play to their strengths. So that's what we're going to talk about today. As Jayne mentioned, we're probably going to straddle a little bit the theory behind it, and then we're going to get more practical as we get on through the course of today. So with no further ado, then I'll get started. So today we're going to focus on these practical steps to becoming a neuro-inclusive employer and our Welcome to Work pledge. So this is what we're going to talk about today. I think it's always courteous to say this is what you're in for, really, over the next hour. We're going to start with why this matters. Hopefully that's not going to be too hard of a sell, but we'll do it anyway, because again, I think that's courteous. Then we've got a sort of an interactive activity with some breakout rooms just to check that everybody was really listening and to get everybody's input into what comes next. Then we'll talk through the Welcome to Work pledge, what that involves, what it is, how we can help you. And then we'll finish up with some questions and answers. As Jayne did say, if you have questions, I can't see the chat at the moment, but Tasha can. So she's monitoring that. If you can't wait, please feel free to heckle. I've heard worse things than you can imagine. So yeah, I've got quite a thick skin. So just shout out if you do have a question. So why does neuroinclusive hiring matter? Well, to give you an overview of the statistics involved, about 20% of the population is neurodivergent one way or another. I think that number might be slightly higher if you look at statistics around young people, school-age people. In the City of Edinburgh Council area, between 30 and 50% of pupils have additional support needs. So I suspect that this is something that we're going to be hearing more about as that generation ages through and comes into the world of work. But at the moment, we really talk about 1 in 5 people are neurodivergent. I assume that we all have some level of familiarity with what neurodiversity is, what neurodivergence is, but it's an umbrella label that encompasses a range of neurotypes, things that people have commonly heard of, like ADHD or autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, a whole range of things. Anxiety is in there as well. So it effectively is a label that refers to people who have different cognitive processes, who think differently. And why does this matter in terms of employment? Well, as you can see from the graph on the right there, if you are neurotypical, you basically have a 3 in 4 chance of having a job if you're working age. If you are autistic, you have a 3 in 10 chance of having a job. So you're 70% chance of being unemployed if you are autistic. Today is Autism Awareness Day as well. And so it's particularly pertinent that we're talking about this today. So across the board, the metrics for people who are neurodivergent are worse than neurotypical people. There's still a lot of poor outcomes for people who are neurodivergent. Really across the board when it comes to sort of prison populations or, hospitalization rates, life expectancy is shorter if you're neurodivergent. So as a society, we're not really doing enough and we're not really getting the outcomes that we should, given that everybody you speak to says we should be neuroinclusive. So there's sort of structural problems in the way. So why does this matter? From a self-interested perspective, I always bang the drum for the fact that if you hire neurodivergent people, your organization will be better. So when we talk about neurodiversity, that means teams that include neurodivergent and neurotypical people. So it's that diversity, that have that mixture of different thought types within your organization. I always think that the altruistic reason, particularly for big businesses, is a good reason to get them to pretend they care about something. The social justice reason will get them to put a tweet up or post something on LinkedIn during Neurodiversity Celebration Week. But the self-interested reason is what gets them to actually make those changes. So these support this idea that if you hire a neurodiverse team, your organization is actually better. So 70% of organizations, they struggle with recruitment and retention. That might apply to your business, that applies to businesses of all sizes. If you're struggling with recruitment and retention and you're excluding 20% of the population, then the problem is a little bit on you. It's not necessarily on the candidates that apply. If you can make your processes neuroinclusive, then you've opened up your pool of potential talent and you're missing out on giant talent. A statistic that's not on there, but perhaps should be, is that NASA hires more than 50% of its employees as neurodivergent. Tasha's laughing because I always use this statistic. So more than 50% of employees at NASA are neurodivergent. So whatever your business is doing, if it is less difficult and important than putting someone on the moon and bringing them back alive, then you can afford to hire more neurodivergent people. They're an incredibly talented group of people who are excluded from the job market. So there is a competitive advantage to hiring neurodivergent people. There's a lot of data coming out now about how much better teams actually run if they are neurodiverse. So this is from an ERNS or an EY study. 30%. Teams are 30% more productive if they have a mixture of viewpoints in them. If you have a meeting, you should be including a diversity of voices, and that includes neurodiversity. And then the final one, which should kind of scare everybody a little bit, is the £30,000 figure. That's what the cost of replacing the average employee in the UK. So that's an employee on the average wage. So if an employee leaves on the average wage, it's going to cost you £30,000 to replace them in lost productivity. And it take about 28 weeks, so 6 months of lost productivity. On that basis, you can afford to make changes to keep neurodivergent employees in your organization because it's saving you money. If it's costing you less than £30,000, it's going to save you money. So this is, hopefully what the financial case is for doing all this stuff. The final and the most scary case as to why you should be neuroinclusive in your hiring practice is that the Equality Act, the law says you have to. So the Equality Act is a little bit outdated. It's from 2010. Autism diagnostic rates are 787% higher now than they were when the Equality Act was written. So it's a little bit outdated. There are a lot of grey areas involved. And And kind of unfortunately, neurodivergence is lumped in with disability in the Equality Act as a protected characteristic, which is obviously not ideal. But what it says specifically about recruitment is you have to be careful about the phrases you use in your job posting. So you shouldn't say things like, we were looking for a recent graduate or someone that's highly experienced, because they're actually discriminatory, because you're clearly targeting young people or someone who's older. Only if they're actual requirements of the job. And we'll talk a little bit later about how job posting should only mention things that actually relate to the job anyway. That's just good practice. And then you can't ask about someone's health or disability. Disability in this context refers to neurodivergence. Only if it's necessary and essential to the job. Or if you're asking someone if they need additional help for the interview, which is what we will be talking about today. Or if you're using positive action to recruit a disabled person. So if you say, well, actually, our office doesn't have any neurodivergent people, maybe we should hire some. I would first of all challenge whether you might have a few employees who are just not told you that they're neurodivergent. But if you do decide you want to get those employment rates up, you are allowed to use positive action, although it can be legally problematic. So with a giant caveat that I'm not a lawyer, that is what the law says on recruitment and neuroinclusive hiring. So we did a little survey. We've been running this over the previous few weeks about what neurodivergent people's common barriers to recruitment are. And we split it into three. That's a theme that we'll run with a lot today, is job posting, assessment, and then interviews. So the first one comes down to job posting. So 80% of respondents to our survey, neurodivergent respondents to our survey, said that they didn't apply to a job because the language in the job posting was too confusing. So that goes back to this idea of there's a pool of talent you're missing out on. And rewriting your job posting doesn't take a lot of effort. It doesn't cost a lot of money either, but you're missing out on talent. What are the main discouragements during the application process? These are the four most common answers. There were too many stages. There was no communication. There was too many additional assessments. And it felt like they're already looking for somebody in their network. So the employer had a clear idea of who they were looking for. And then maybe they weren't looking to hire someone who was a little bit different in the way that they approach things. And then the areas of interviews, I think interviews are probably the most problematic area for a lot of neurodivergent people. What areas of interviews cause you to struggle? Abstract questions, that was the most common one. Look at that, 70% of respondents said that was the most common cause of struggle. A high pressure environment, I think we can all probably empathize with that. Sensory issues, so distracting things around the lighting, the noise in the interview room, someone clicking a pen, something like that. Rapid question format, firing off questions, maybe asking 2 questions at a time, not giving enough processing time, and similarly, not enough preparation time for the questions. So these are the things that exist now. These are the problems. If you think about what your own recruitment process was, either if you're an employer or the recruitment process you use to get into your current employment, you can probably understand where these people are coming from. And all of the struggles that neurotypical people face, neurodivergent people face to a arguably much greater degree. Okay. So now I'm going to stop talking for a bit. That's the little blurb entry, why you should care about this and what are the challenges that people face. I'm going to hand over to Tasha now for our interactive exercise. Just before Tasha starts, I'm going to copy a link into the chat to a Google document that will give you your exercises for the breakout rooms. We're going to put into 3 separate breakout rooms. So if you can't necessarily access the Google Doc, it's likely that someone else will be able to. But if there's any major problems, please let me know in the chat. Okay, Tasha, over to you.
Thanks so much. Hello, everybody. So what we're looking to do with the interactive exercise is having a think of the case studies that you have been given and looking into the questions that are being asked surrounding that and having a look at where we would come from in terms of how would we make this more neuro-inclusive? How are we going to break down these barriers? And in terms of, you know, potentially looking at the unclear job descriptions, what is the ability to make it more accessible for everybody? And essentially, what small things can we change to open the door to the 20% of the candidate pool that essentially we're not tapping into? So I think it would be great, Andy, if we get everybody split into the rooms and then we can start the interactive exercise. I will be nipping in and out of the rooms so that if you have any questions at all, just let me know and I can come in and we can discuss that and have a think about the answers or anything you're not sure about, and I'm able to support you. Okay. One full disclaimer though, I'm really sorry, I have a very old cat who likes to troll me whenever I'm on webinars. So if you hear him, please just ignore him, because it's all for the attention. So just in case you hear him howling, I apologize in advance. The joys of working from home. I'd say there's really, really great conversations going on in terms of hitting the mark on language, having those blended approaches, understanding where neurodivergent people are coming from, and being able to start that communication and that conversation was really, really powerful, impactful in the conversations that I was part of. So yeah, great job.
Maybe we could have sort of a brief summary from each of the breakout rooms, if anybody wants to put their head above the parapet and volunteer from breakout room 1. What the language of the job posting? What were the kind of the issues you faced, and what were the potential solutions? Anybody from breakout room 1 want to volunteer?
No. Am I allowed to nominate people? No.
You were in breakout room 1. Maybe you could summarize for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I dipped into the breakout room, there was a lot of chat about what is inclusive language and what can put autistic people off from wanting to. And it's things like fast-paced, dynamic, all of these buzzwords that we're seeing, and we're thinking, oh my God, right, okay, yeah, this is really exciting, but actually, no, it's not for me. I don't want fast paced. That means that there'll be an expectation and a constant pressure, you know, dynamic, innovative, all of these kind of words. They sound fantastic in a way to be able to advertise a company, but essentially when you walk through the door, none of that's actually going on. So it's having that ability to really look at what you're asking for and use the inclusive language that is skill-based rather than culture-based, in terms of how do we advertise and make our company look fantastic, rather than how do we make this company look attractive to the people we are trying to recruit. So yeah, really fantastic.
Brilliant. And then breakout room 2 was the assessment process. So the process of sifting and filtering through applicants. Is there anybody in breakout room 2 who wants to summarize what the discussion was?
Kind of caught the end of it there when we came back and Tasha was talking about it. So it was about simplifying the application process for people who may have the skills but maybe don't look like they do on paper, through having, you know, career gaps, and it specifically says looking disorganized on paper. So finding other methods in which that can be assessed, where people can put their best foot forward.
Yeah, I think there was a really positive opinion in Breakout 2 that what's on paper doesn't necessarily mean that that is a true representation of the candidate that's been put forward for the application, and having the ability to look at how do we look past this? How do we understand who the person is rather than the traditional piece of paper CV? Is there another way that we can help them represent themselves that's truer in a form than being able to put something on a CV, where some people aren't great at producing CVs? We do have what I term squiggly career paths, and they are instantly kind of cast aside, and how we don't see that as a negative, but we're seeing that as a positive, and then breaking that barrier to be able to open the conversation with Nina so that she can be part of the selection process on the same level as all candidates. So yeah, really fantastic. And Breakout 3, I'm sorry, I can't help because I didn't manage to get to you, which was the interview process.
I'm happy to pitch in some. I mean, I think we as a group focused how we'd make it better for the candidate. So, I mean, a practice we have here is we always invite people in before the interview for an informal visit, so they can come along with a friend, family member, whoever, to visit the facility, and really that's to to let people get familiar with everything, the journey, the parking, where the toilets are, probably the most important thing, the lay of the land, where the interview will take place. Then I think we also spoke about, and the other thing we spoke about was offering online interviews, if you know, if that made it easier for Omar, if he'd prefer to do it online, we facilitate that. And then one thing I'd take on board is sending the questions out in advance, because we're not there to challenge people. We're there to learn their strengths. So actually sending people the questions in advance, something we haven't done, but to be honest, it's something we will do going forward, because there's no reason why the candidate shouldn't be able to read those in advance and prepare to put themselves forward in the best light. So
yeah, I think it's really important that, and Andy, I discuss this quite a lot, that when you're looking at recruitment and candidates in the neuroinclusive pool, and you have your neurodivergent individuals that are trying to get their foot in the door, a lot of what I discuss is conduct versus capability. And the way you need to think about this is that they're not wanting to do the interview because they feel as though they're better than that. It's a capability that they can't do the interview because you are not opening a platform for them to access those interviews. And you can absolutely have different ways of making that accessible. I think allowing people to come in and do a recce before they're supposed to come and do the interview is a fantastic option. I mean, I will hold my hand up. Whenever I've had an interview, the day before has been spent driving around, walking around, making sure I know where I'm going, so that when I do turn up the next day, I'm not going to be late. I think another one is having an interview start window of 10 minutes, because if you're trying to struggle with time blindness, or you're desperate to get there and something happens and then you instantly feel that you've been written off because you're 2 minutes late for an interview, having a 10-minute interview start buffer is really helpful, because it just lets you settle into it, and that expectation is set with all people involved. Having the interview questions sent in advance, there's a lot of conflict around this, that you're giving someone more of a step up and compared to other people, but you're not, you're just making it more accessible. You're giving somebody that has the ability to pre-prepare, to be able to emotionally regulate, so they can bring their best self to an interview. And I think that's really powerful.
yeah, when someone's in the job, you don't give them a task and expect them to do it. You know, they're going to go off, research that task and get on with it. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Really great conversations around all of it. I think you've also really got it, and wanting to have those conversations is the first step to creating a neuro-inclusive organization.
That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I'm going to just reshare my screen again. But I don't know why this is harder than it needs to be. Let me try again. Apologies.
Sometimes it just takes a while to load, Andy. I don't know why, but
I'm a very impatient person, I guess. There we go. Okay. I mean, what was clear from listening to those discussions anyway, is probably kind of two principles that underpin all of this neuroinclusion work that we're talking about today, but all the neuroinclusion work we do in general. And the first one is that neuro-inclusive tactics make the organization better for everybody. So they improve things for neurotypical people as well. All of those things that we discussed, I consider myself to be a neurotypical person. And that sounds like I would have a much better experience of applying for a job were I to sort of have, like you said, a buffer window, or different options when I were applying for the job. That sounds fantastic. And I've forgotten what the other thing was now. But the other principle behind it is that none of these things are really reinventing the wheel as well. It's just about expanding things that many people do already and just making them standard practice, so that the default shifts So this is why we've launched the Welcome to Work pledge then. This is a Welcome Brain pledge, which is about neuro-inclusive hiring. The goals behind it are, firstly, to remove the daunting element behind being neuro-inclusive. I know, particularly for small businesses, particularly social enterprises, businesses that have small budgets, you might think that this is a big business thing to do and it's going to be expensive. But we've tried to remove that so that it's as easy as possible. So this shouldn't cost any additional money to implement any of these things. This is all about making it so that there are no excuses. And the second idea behind it is that we want to create a market pressure behind being neuro-inclusive. So we want to create a pledge that companies sign up to. If you sign up to it, you can display on your website that you have signed it, so that prospective candidates will see, okay, look, they've signed this pledge, they care about neuro-inclusion, they know what they're doing. If I apply for this position, I'm going to have an easier time of it. I know that they care about me, and I know that this is going to be an organization that is neuro-inclusive. So I'll walk you through it. Who is this pledge for? This pledge is for absolutely everybody. If you are hiring one employee, this pledge is for you. We've had a few bigger organizations sign. We've had a few smaller organizations sign, but there's nobody that's precluded from this. So this applies across industries, across sectors. It applies, I guess, internationally. I don't think we've had anybody international sign it yet, but this is not something that applies only to a particular sector or size of business. What do you get if you sign the Welcome to Work pledge? You basically get everything. You get absolutely everything you need. So we will send you all of the resources and materials that you need. We will be on hand to support you with any questions that are not covered by the resources. On a couple of slides, I'll talk about, break down what those resources actually are, but you get absolutely everything you need to do this. What do you have to do? Well, in order to sign the pledge, you have to commit to implementing neuro-inclusive hiring over the next 12 months. Again, that's very sort of soft, but we've tried to make it so there's no excuses. So you've got 12 months to implement these things across 3 different areas, the 3 areas that we've covered today. The language of your job postings, the assessment process by which you sift through applicants, and the interview process. Again, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a second. But you have to sign a commitment to implement those over the next 12 months. In terms of certification, I know that there are various certifications out there in different areas. They run the gamut of ease of self-certification from Living Wage Scotland, which is quite an easy process to sign up for. It's a self-certification process. At the other end of the spectrum is the B Corp process, which is really, really involved and takes about 18 months, 2 years. We're definitely on the living wage side of those things. So it's a pretty easy thing to sign up to, and it's a commitment that you assess yourself against. And how much does it cost? It costs absolutely nothing. So this is not an advertorial or anything like that. We've designed this as part of our social enterprise mission. This costs you nothing. All of the resources you get, all of the IP you get from us, all the support you get from us is free. Again, there are no excuses. So these are the 3 key mini commitments that you have to make. As I say, we've broken it down to these 3 thematic areas that we keep coming back to today. So because of what you've just done in those breakout rooms, you should have an idea, and some of you may be doing this already, but the first one is around the language of job postings. So we have it once you sign the pledge, or once you look on our website, you can see in more specific detail, and we provide you with template language, but we want you to be using clear, accessible language, focusing on essential skills. So that was the principle I was trying to remember earlier, but that actually these are just good business practices as well. When you're writing a job posting, and as Robert said, actually, it's so rare in a job that you ask someone to be spontaneous, or they're required to come up with a meaningful solution to a problem on the spot. But we still ask people to do that in interviews. So there's a disconnect between that process. So I often say what we do is we're a business consultancy that looks at things through a neuro-inclusion lens, because all the things we tell businesses to do are just business practices, good business practices. And one of those is around job postings. So don't just copy and paste what you've always done. Have a look at your job postings and say, actually, does that relate to what the job is doing? Are we asking for good people skills when it's a back office role? Are we demanding that somebody's a quick thinker when that's not what they have to do? In the job posting as well, you should state your commitment to neuro-inclusion. So be loud and proud about the fact that you have signed this pledge, and about the fact that you are a neuro-inclusive organization. As we've seen, 80% of people won't apply for the job if it's confusing or they think that it's excluding them. So make sure you trumpet your neuro-inclusive principles. In your candidate selection, make sure you use bias-free recruitment tools and avoid discriminatory assessment methods. I suppose what we're dancing around here, there's a stat that says that 99% of Fortune 500 companies now use AI in their candidate selection for roles. And while AI is good at saving time, and it can be a very useful tool, and Tasha and I were at a conference talking about how great AI was a couple of weeks ago, you need a human safeguard if you're going to use it. Don't use AI-only tools, because as I can't remember who said it, someone from room 2 said, if you have an atypical job history, if you've chopped and changed your jobs quite a lot, if you've done anything atypical, the AI is just going to put you in the bin. Robocop is just going to destroy your CV and put it straight in the bin. So you need a human to check these as well if you are going to use AI, and try and make sure that you're iterating with your AI to avoid filtering people out. When it comes to interviews, you're committed to doing the things that we talked about. So share your interview questions in advance is a really, really simple one. As we've discussed, it's actually better practice. Edinburgh Social Enterprise Network have implemented this, and they said that their interviews were, I think, direct quote, 1,000,000% better than they had been previously, because people actually prepare for them and research for them. It's not cheating to allow people to research. That's what happens in meetings, in actual jobs as well. And then use your flexible and empathetic interview formats. If I had to use one word to sum up what neuroinclusion actually means, it's personalization. And personalization is allowing people to have their own experience and play to their strengths. That applies more, obviously, when they get into the world of work as well, but it definitely applies to this. So it's just, if you had to have one word in mind when you're implementing neuroinclusive practices, it's about personalization, allowing people to personalize their experience. So these are the 3 commitments that you make when you sign the Welcome to Work pledge. You've got 12 months to implement them. None of them should really cost you any money. None of them should require that much work. It doesn't require any money to us for setting up on this, and we send you a load of stuff. So the stuff we send you is then a checklist that covers all this stuff in a bit more detail. I know people like checklists for actually making sure they've completed a task in totality. A digital resource toolkit. So that's a lot of sort of things that you can put on your LinkedIn, things you can put on your website, the images that you can use when you're job posting, just to make sure that you're really advertising this stuff. An FAQ sheet. We're going to cover some of the FAQs, I presume, at the end of this session, but there's bound to be more. An internal communications template. That's bigger if better if you've got a bigger team and you're going to be communicating to your existing employees that you've signed this pledge and what that means in practice. That's often a good way to start neuroinclusive conversations within your organization. But it's a template email you can send out to your staff to say, this is what we've done, this is why we're doing it. If you have any questions, let us know. A sample job posting template as well. That's to help you get the language right. Obviously, each job is going to be slightly different. Each employer is slightly different, but just to give you an indication of what you're sending on or what you're posting. And then a language guide to accomplish that. So it's a best practices guide around the language you use. Interview best practice guide. We've talked about that quite a lot, but interviews are probably the biggest area of difficulty for neurodivergent people. So there's a big section on how you can run your interviews. And then guidance on alternative selection criteria. So how can we sift through applicants? How can we assess applicants in a more neuroinclusive and neuro-friendly way? So this is all the things you get. Once you sign up for it, we send you across a packet. I sent one of them out this morning that has all of this stuff on it. But again, if you have questions or you have sort of specific tailoring you need, please let us know. We are here to help. If you want to sign the pledge, if we've convinced you already, you can do so via our website, which is welcomebrain.com. I think Jayne said she was going to be sending out all of the information at the end of this. You can also email us, info@welcomebrain.com. If you want something a bit more personal, you can either email Andy@welcomebrain.com or Tasha@welcomebrain.com. But you can also find the contact information on our website. And what we'd like to ask as well is whether you decide to sign the pledge or not. Obviously, we would prefer that you did. But if you, regardless of what you do, if you can spread the word about the pledge as well, that's how we create this market pressure. We want to create a situation where the default has changed. So instead of us having to run webinars or run campaigns to persuade people to be neuroinclusive, it should be that's the default. And people are having to explain why they're not being neuroinclusive. Particularly true of bigger organizations. It was Neurodiversity Celebration Week a couple of weeks ago. And there was a lot of posting on LinkedIn I saw, and then it all went very quiet the week after. So bigger organizations, they like to do this stuff. So if we can hold their feet to the fire and keep the pressure on them, it's about creating this idea that neuroinclusion should be expected. So as I say, this is a growing field. Eventually the law will be updated, the Equality Act will be updated, so we're all going to have to do it anyway. So it's about being ahead of the curve before this group of Gen Zs who are much more au fait with neuroinclusion and are much better at demanding their adjustments and accommodations enter the workforce in numbers. Everybody panicked when the millennials entered the workforce because we're all a bunch of self-indulgent, smashed avocado eating, feckless individuals. But wait till the Gen Zs come along. They're going to start demanding things around neuroinclusion that we haven't expected to this point. So it's better to get ahead of the curve because this is coming. And so, yeah, I think that's all I have to say really on the matter. We're happy to answer any questions, but I would love it if you all signed up and you all evangelized about this as well. It's sort of an ethical pyramid scheme that we're running here. So if you could tell some people about this, then we'll share the love that way. So that's all it is from me and Tasha for now. But again, happy to answer any questions you might have. And thank you everybody for coming along today.
Excellent. Thanks ever so much, Andy, Tasha. Yeah, hands up for questions or put them in the chat if you've got any experiences you want to share with us around your own good practice or any good or less good experiences you've had yourself in this area. Do let us know. Mirabelle Viviana?
Yeah, hi.
Please come in.
Thank you so much. I'm absolutely thrilled about the work you are doing at Welcome Brain. And I have a question, because whether you already are also targeting people's places like job centers, medical surgeries, and
inclusive, because that is somewhere where I feel they have no idea how to be neuro inclusive. Otherwise, I would, like I said already, I want to really go in those areas and get them more aware. And obviously your information and your knowledge and the way you present it is really good. So thank you very much. That's me.
Thank you, Mirabelle. We lost you a little bit in the middle there, or I certainly did anyway. But I think you were asking about job centers, doctor surgeries. Yeah, I mean, I agree that would be wonderful if they embraced it. I mean, we're not targeting them specifically, but again, if you want to speak to any of them on our behalf, then that would be amazing. Thank you.
Andy, there's a comment in the chat from Matthew asking whether your certification is unique, and are there any other standards that are similar out there currently?
There are some other standards. I think, for example, there's Autistica, which is an organization down in London. They have a similar standard. I don't want to say how much different they have from us. I'm not entirely sure, but and I think that they come from a background of autism, whereas we're neuroinclusion and neurodiversity more broadly. But yeah, I think that there are some other ones out there. Obviously, ours is the best by miles, but yeah, there are other things out there.
Thanks, Andy. Amy, I know you were having issues with your camera and mic earlier, so I'll ask your question also. Do people need to be diagnosed, or can people self-diagnose to ask for reasonable adjustments to recruitment and employment?
Yeah, that's a really important question. Sorry, Tasha, do you want to answer that? Sorry.
Well, what I was going to say is a really, really great question, because the answer is no. And you essentially, you don't have to have that diagnosis to be protected under the Equality Act, because that is defined in the Equality Act that a disability is a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on a person's availability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. And that is a protected characteristic under the Equality Act 2010. So even if you have the non-diagnosed and diagnosed argument, when it comes to reasonable adjustments, support and access to work applications, no, you do not need to be diagnosed to be supported.
And if I can add just something onto that as well, is that there's also the issue of disclosure as well, because people might not be interested, might not be sort of willing to disclose that they are neurodivergent as part of this process. People still rightfully have this idea that if they disclose, then they're going to be seen as difficult or not hired in the first place. So this is why we have to have universalism when it comes to neuroinclusion. So as somebody said in the chat, you should be sending out your interview questions to everybody as a matter of course anyway, because then it doesn't force them to email and say, well, I'm neurodivergent, please can I have the interview questions in advance. This is about changing practices across the board and bringing in universalism for that reason.
Yeah, and I think the point you made earlier about you know, it's making it better for everyone, so everyone benefits. You know, I think that that's really important. Keith, how are you doing? Oh, you're on mute, Keith.
Sorry, I was thanking you, Jayne. Thank you. It's just a question. This is obviously focused on mainly on recruitment and getting people settled in, but most employers will probably be employing, or large employers will probably be employing someone who is neurodivergent already. So I'm just wondering what support you have in place for employers so we can improve our practice for supporting and managing current staff.
Great question. We heard the distinction at the conference a little while ago. What's the difference between diversity and inclusion? And I think today we talked a lot about diversity, which is actually getting neurodivergent people into the role, but inclusion comes with what happens next once you've got them in. Are they just there sort of tokenistically because you feel like you should? And so the inclusion part of it is the long-term process once they're in there. And we have loads of different supports. Actually, the bulk of what we do is around supporting organizations to create inclusion. So, you know, we can do things like individual employee mentoring. We can help with HR guides, policy documents. We can help with, you know, consulting with managers and team leaders. We've done a lot of workshops and training. I know at least one person in this meeting has been to one of our trainings, has organized one of our trainings for their team so that the rest of the team know about managing neurodivergent people. And so, yeah, I mean, that is the bulk of what we do, because it's about getting the structures in place in your organization to allow neurodivergent people to thrive. And as you rightly said, you know, working on the basis that 20% of employees are neurodivergent, bigger organizations, if you've got an organization of 5 people, statistically, one of them is going to be neurodivergent. So often neurodivergent people can mask temporarily, or that does lead to burnout, and neurodivergent people might not want to disclose, but yeah, they do exist in these organizations. So it doesn't even have to be a massive organization to require this support. It can just be, you know, a relatively small enterprise, anybody with 5 or more employees.
Yeah, and actually, say you're a team of 4 and one person is neurodivergent, that you know, improving their experience of being in work can make a huge difference to the organisation anyway. So, there's a question from Ryan in the chat about where the figure of teams being 30% more productive when they are neurodiverse come from.
I can share that link, but it's from an EY study they did. Actually, I tell a lie. It's a JP Morgan Chase study they did, because they run a program internally called Autism at Work, and so that stat is from them. Yeah, I can share the link when we send it all out. But there's more and more data with these big businesses like Microsoft, EY, that are all doing these studies into sort of neurodivergence at work. They're getting more and more data on it. So this is not just sort of anecdotal at this point. We're getting more and more actual credible evidence to back it up.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Has her hand up.
Oh,
thanks. Sorry, I can't find the hand up button.
Oh, Grace, sorry.
No worries. We just finished a bit of research. We're based down in Dumfries and Galloway, and I've been doing a bit of work on neuroinclusion over the last couple of years, and we've just finished a bit of research with neurodivergent adults locally and employers locally, including statutory agencies and third sector and a few private employers, around kind of what neurodivergent people's needs are in the workplace, but also what employers' needs and barriers are to supporting neurodivergent people. And I think, Keith, your point is sort of really well made, because what we're sort of finding is that there are, you know, neurodivergent people who are getting into the workplace through that interview process, but then it all falls apart at that point because reasonable adjustments aren't put in place. Conversations between OC Health, the manager, and the neurodivergent person and access to work are fragmented and don't come together. So people have high expectations about what can be offered, and the employer might not actually be able to offer that in the long term. And also, you know, a big bit about, you know, particularly women will often be diagnosed significantly later in life if they're diagnosed at all. And so the number of sort of neurodivergent people in the workplace who don't even know that they're neurodivergent. You know, I'm like that. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 51 because menopause made my symptoms worse. And there's lots of other people in that kind of situation. And you know, often people are stuck in these kind of conduct and capability absence management processes where they're burnt out, or their behaviours are such that people in teams don't understand them, or they're just not a good fit, supposedly. And so that sort of support and management awareness and you know, all of that kind of post work support, post interview and employment support is so vitally important. And again, that kind of actually neuro-inclusive teams where neurodivergent people can thrive helps everybody, because actually there's lots of other people who need those kind of situations. So yeah, it's interesting. You know, we can if anyone's interested, it's not quite finished yet, the research, we need to kind of write it up, but finally, but we can share that certainly if people are interested. And I'd be really interested to chat to Andy and Tasha about you know, what we've kind of done and how you guys can maybe use some of that to help support your work and vice versa, etc. too.
Yeah, I think kind of off the back of that, what we have to consider is that if you're putting your inclusive recruitment strategies in place, you also have to build the foundations of an inclusive work environment. And the starting point is having these conversations. And you're absolutely right. One of the things that I certainly kind of say, and Andy will have heard me say this before, is that neurodivergent people's profile traits are as unique to them as their fingerprint. If you meet somebody with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD, because their struggles and the profile traits that they will overcome day to day are totally different from someone else. So blanket reasonable adjustment approaches are not necessarily successful. However, what we're trying to do is stop the paralyzation of the variables that organizations are expected to overcome, because if you look at it from that point, it is huge. And there are small free practices that you can put in place for neurodivergent individuals that will make neurotypical people successful as well. And as you said, Grace, and I mentioned it before, it's all about coming from a conduct versus capability. How do you help somebody that wants to do their job do their job?
Thanks very much. Thanks, Grace. Hearing you speak, I think that was quite powerful. So thank you for sharing that with us. And if you do have that research that you can share with us, we can obviously disseminate it across this group and our wider social enterprise network also, because I think this is incredibly important. I'm conscious of time and we're 1 minute over. I've posted the evaluation survey in the chat. If you get a couple of minutes, that would be much appreciated. I just want to say a big thank you to Andy and Tasha for coming along today, talking about neuroinclusion, opening up their kind of experiences and resources to us all for free, which is heartwarming, I think, to see. And thank you all for coming along today and participating and being willing to share your own experiences and to learn, continuously improve. I think the only other thing that I have to say, and it's a kind of plug just in case you're not aware, but there are a number of equity, diversity and inclusion social enterprise networks set up. They're free to join. I'll send the information out in the follow-up email, but they are broadly themed around global majority, LGBTQ+, women in social enterprise, and then there is a fairly new network for disabled leaders of social enterprises or people with neurodiversity or with a long-term health condition. So again, it's about kind of sharing experiences, peer support, raising awareness and all of that good stuff that comes with kind of a kind of network approach. So I think that's all from me. Thank you again to the speakers. Thank you for coming along. yeah, hopefully see you soon. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Yeah. Before you all run away, would you be
Oh.
okay for me to take a screenshot of everybody? That's anybody that doesn't want to be on it, if you want to put your video off and I can get a lovely screenshot of us all smiling, if that would be okay. Is everybody all right with that? If you're not, pop your video off and okay, so everyone get your best smiley faces on and I'll do this. Okay, I think that's us. Fabby.
Thank you, everybody.
I'll share
Have a
that
great
with
day.
you.
Enjoy the
Thanks
sunshine.
again. See you later.
Yeah, enjoy the
Bye-bye.
sunshine.